Hello everybody, this is Richard Stashy from Tinker to Tales, and today I am going to talk about my next video, The Shining Inspirations Part 2. Before I begin with that, I would like to address the difference between a ripoff and inspired. A ripoff is a movie term, is a film that is attempting to steal the plot or concept of another movie. And some parodies as well as homages can be considered as ripoffs. For this case, the example I'm going to bring up is The Matrix. Matrix created what is considered the bullet time visual effect. That's when the whole entire screen freezes for a few seconds and you just see the character making a very fast move to dodge bullets. The bullet time scene in The Matrix has been reused in several movies, such as Shrek. And even though they are using The Matrix bullet time, the scene itself is a parody, although it's still kind of like a ripoff. Now, an inspired is a little different. Inspired is to make someone want to do something or to give someone an idea on what to do or create. Now, going back to The Matrix, the visual effects is very similar to another movie that was done in 1978. I'll just speed over here to Superman. There's a scene where Clark Kent is in the alley and he catches the bullet really fast. This could be seen as inspired. That's because both movies of the concept of the bullet time effect is not stealing from each other. And I just want to point out that Matrix itself, even though it has coined the term bullet time, it's been kind of like been used in film for many years before, but it has not been like called out as bullet time until Matrix happened, and then the bunch of copycats or ripoffs of the bullet time effect for almost 10 years. Now, why I must address this? Well, it seems that there are a few people watching my Shining Inspiration video and they don't understand the meaning of inspired. They are looking for a blatant ripoff, maybe because the filmmaking has been slipping for decades and it's easy to rip something off from another movie that worked than being inspired from and making something new from that. And some of these new movies do take the inspiration from the older material and a whole new level of ripping off too. I'm just shaking my head on the whole thing. It's just, and this is a huge rabbit hole to go down to talk about, but I will try to address more about this later or in the comments. But I just want to point out that what I'm talking about is inspiring and inspirational. That you could see a few elements here and there in the movies that seem to be taken into context into something else, if I explain it correctly. Now, as for inspiration, I want to talk about the movie Time After Time. For some people that might not know, the song title was borrowed from the TV guide listings for the 1979 movie Time After Time, which Cyndi Lauper had intended to use only as a temporary placeholder during the writing process. Although she later tried to change the song's name, she said that it felt at some point that Time After Time had become so fundamental to the song that it would fall apart with a different name title. And this, once again, she's not ripping off the title. She just basically borrowed it, inspired from it, and she just built from it. And I'll also bring up Firestarter, which I was really surprised to find out about this one. Anne Rice repeatedly returned to Stephen King's Firestarter for inspiration, saying that I study the novel Firestarter whenever I'm blocked. Reading the first few pages of Firestarter helps me get me going. Now, I'm not really too sure what she means by that. I don't know. My experience with Stephen King is not stellar. I don't see him being that great of a writer, and I guess she might just there might be something in Firestarter that just ticks her off, as far as I know. Okay, and then next we have John Lennon's Instant Karma. According to this little reference that I pulled up, it says Instant Karma managed to expert the considerable influence on The Shining. The song refrain inspired to the concept of The Shining, which figures so prominently in the novel. In a way, the idea of instant karma inspired a horror novel makes sense, as the song with foreboding lyrics. Now, I kind of disagree with this, and I wanted to point out that I believe Stanley Kubrick was inspired from a different song, just to give you an idea of what song we're talking about. I'm thinking Shine On You Crazy Diamond by Pink Floyd in their Wish You Were Here album. My theory is that Stephen King wrote The Shining before Carrie. I don't have much proof on it, but I do have a sneaky suspicion that um, the Shining is probably a few different stories and it's just combined into one. And thus, this is the reason why the main character is called John Daniel Edward Torrance. And I think at one point he was calling him John, another point Daniel, and then another one Edward. And then he cleaned it up after the publishing of Curie. That's my feeling. Now, how does this come in play with the movie that we're going to talk about? Well, the movie that I'm going to be talking about is called The Night Visitor. And The Night Visitor is a 1971 Swedish psychological thriller filmed in English, starring Max von Sydow, Liv Ullmann, Trevor Howard, Pierre Oscarson, Rupert Davis, Andrew Carr, and directed by Lucille Bennett. Hopefully I said those names good. All right, I summarized the plot very simple over here. The plot is Salem, which I would like to emphasis on. Here's another name for another book that Stephen King wrote also around the time, Salem's Lot. Anyway, the plot is Salem escapes from the confines of a fortress-like asylum in the dead of winter. Driven insane from being institutionalized for the last 2 years, he reaches his family's farm, now run by his younger sister Emma and Esther, and the latter's husband, Dr. Andern Jenks, who accuse Salem of the murder. And this is the movie Night Visitor. Now, what I'm going to cover for the first part is that I'm going to cover some similarities between Night Visitor and The Shining book, and which was kind of odd because when I watched the movie and then I was thinking about it, I was just wondering that is it possible that Stanley Cooper commissioned Stephen King to write something like The Shining for his movie? And when I passed that off to Miss M, she definitely reassured me that there's no way it's possible because if I said her words correctly, if he did, he'll probably be boasting about it, which is really true. So I don't see anything wrong with anybody using. I don't see anything wrong using materials from other stuff as inspiration. So my question is, why Stephen King doesn't own up to this or at least mention about this? I have no idea. And we'll start off with Liv Ullmann. Now, for those who don't know, this person I just circled is Liv Ullmann. And sure enough, I'm putting her side by side by Stuart Ullman because, believe it or not, they're almost the same spelling. The only difference is just an additional N she has. And naturally, she's a girl, he's a boy. Now, Stuart Ullman is um, based on the character in Stephen King's novel. And I have a sneaky suspicion that it's quite possible that Stuart Ullman was originally a girl. Thus, I think Stephen King modeled Stuart Ullman from Liv Ullmann. And I kind of have a sneaky suspicion that Stanley Kubrick, um, the reason why towards the deleted scene ending, as you see right over here, Stuart Ullman is wearing this very luxurious fur coat, kind of like a pimpish style fur coat in some senses, but a very luxury, feminine type fur coat. And I think this was a call that he recognized that Stuart Ullman was actually modeled from Liv Ullmann. Now, this is not much of a guaranteed inspiration. There's a lot of movies from the 60s and 70s that actually had a Volkswagen Beetle. So I just wanted to point out that also in The Night Visitor is a Volkswagen Beetle in the movie. And I just wanted to throw this funny little picture in here for you guys to see. The next character in the story, Night Visitor, this actually made me think that Stephen King had to see this movie and it inspired him for what he was working on. This character happens to be called Brit Torrance. Now, sure enough, the spelling of her last name is not the same spelling that Stephen King uses, but the pronunciation between Torrances have been very similar in the movie itself. Um, the pronunciations of Torrance is very similar to how they used it in the movie itself, especially when they're talking to her dad as Mr. Torrance and the mother as Mrs. Torrance. Um, and then the other inspiration that seemed kind of interesting is the asylum itself. In this case, I'll just show you a couple pictures of the asylum and the snowy area. And I just feel that this is what really inspired Stephen King for doing his story about the hotel in the cold, the Stanley Hotel. And here's a nice picture of the Stanley Hotel in the snow. Now, there's nothing wrong about the inspirations. I don't see anything wrong with it. Actually, I am pleased to see that Stephen King actually used something like from this movie itself. Um, but it does make me wonder about the phone call conversation that Stanley Kubrick and Stephen King had. I I believe that Stanley Kubrick was tossing out ideas because he was looking for a little bit more of an impacting ending, and because at the time Stephen King was definitely, well, because of the time Stephen King said that he was hungover, and because we know that he has a history of being very drunk, as well as had a history of cocaine um, throughout the 70s and the 80s, that I feel that he took these questions more of an insult than to add to his story for the movie. And it's quite possible he came off with publishing Carrie and Carrie becoming a very major movie within a couple years, and I think he came off with a very narcissistic attitude where anything that he does should stay how it should be. And it's quite possible that we have the clashing of two intelligence or two geniuses. I don't know, I'm questioning geniuses with Stephen King. Um, but I also feel that the influences of cocaine and alcohol is not really clearing his mind on what on is not giving him a very thoughtful process. Wow, I'm not even sure myself. I'm not even sure myself. It's just that for some reason Stephen King took it as an insult. So the next series of stuff I'm going to show that seem to be inspired from the movie and then and inserted into the story in some ways. And going to start off with Night Visitor again. And in this scene over here, you have Liv Ullmann, and she's looking at a red journal. This journal was kind of important to the story because it has information on. It has some information on there. And as you'll see in this scene, you'll see part of that journal there, and here's it by the phone. And definitely because of this red journal, it seemed to be maybe the inspiration that, or gave it Stanley Cooper inspiration to insert it into the movie itself as the Red Book. Some people has pointed out that it could be a hotel Red Book. Other people have been pointing out that it could be the Red Book from Carl Jung that has not been published yet at the time. I kind of feel that it could be the Little Red Book. In case you guys don't know what the Little Red Book is, I'm not going to read this whole thing for you guys. I'll just leave it up there for you guys to look at. But it's basically a book on AA, Alcohol Anonymous, and the 12-step program that was published back in 1942. And if Stephen King is as drugged up and drunk as he seems to mention he has these issues, I wouldn't be surprised that this was kind of tossed in as a reference to that. And then it typically could be just a typical journal. In some cases, maybe a psychologist's journal, which I'll probably talk more into later segments. A journal for just taking notes. Now, there's another scene in The Night Visitor. This guy walks into a room with a lot of books, as you can see. And unlike your typical bookshelves, these are very in chaotic order looking. I'm not really sure how much of an inspiration this is to the scenes where we see all the books stacked. I have a theory on what the stacked books mean, which I'll probably share that in a future video. but I just feel like it could have been inspired. Then we'll go to the Volkswagen Beetle. This, I feel like there is inspiration for the Volkswagen Beetle itself, and that is the typewriter. They both share the same colors, and they're both German. Now, another thing that's in Night Visitor, I'm going to point out is the detective's sweater. As you can see, it has these diamonds there. And I kind of feel that diamond is Stanley Kubrick's signature. That's my impression from his other films. But in The Shining, there is diamonds used a lot. And in this case, in this scene alone, I mean, we could mention about the glass of milk that Danny's drinking out of, and then the table in a certain angle. Those shapes could be considered diamonds. Now, in the red room there, and then going into the hall, to this little hallway here that goes to the bathroom on this side right there, there's this mural of this diamond-shaped mural. And then behind Jack is also, I hate to say it, but I believe it's the same mural. And I have a sneaky suspicion, this is my feeling about it, which I'll explain more in another video, that this room behind Jack is basically the same room that Dilbert is walking into. And I kind of feel that even though we see these diamond shapes, it might be inspiration from a different movie. And I'll just give you a little hint about that one. And in this movie, I won't mention the movie yet. I'm going to save it for a future video just to get you guys interested in there. Over here you see a nurse. She's talking behind this fence here. Over here, there's this girl. She's leaning against a window with this diamond diamond bars on the window, basically metal bars on the window. And here's another lady, and she's also standing right by these diamonds. And I just feel like those shapes are kind of similar to the diamond mural that I'm seeing. And then going back to the Night Visitor, we have this tie here. This tie is kind of important because I happen to have chloroform on the tie. And they're using it as evidence. Now, there is a pattern on the tire here, and it could be suggesting that, like the pattern that's on Stuart Omen's tie, which no one actually points out, but everyone often points out the pattern on Jack's tie is similar to the hedge maze. And I kind of feel that both ties are kind of similar. And it's really hard to tell because the red one is a little bit, I don't know why, but it's really hard to tell. But I also feel that both of these ties are also inspired from another earlier movie, the one that Michael Caine is wearing in this movie. And in this movie that Michael Caine is in, there's a hedge maze. Right? So there's a lot of things going on. Now, going back to Liv Ullmann, one of the most interesting things that I noticed in this movie is that the way how she folds her hands. Now, she's been using it in this movie as a kind of a restrain from her nervousness, and you see it very well in the later scenes when she's talking to the police detective. I'll just show you a couple clips of it. There's her, have her hand like this, and then she'll just automatically move it over here like this, and then she'll have her hands like this, and then she'll fold her hands, and then she'll fold it a different direction. As you can see, I'll go back. There's this and this. So she's constantly moving her hands around, as you can see. And when she's sitting down there, once again, you'll see her moving her hands around a lot. And I feel like this is definitely a play that Stuart Omen has been doing so much in his with his hands gestures. um, Now this is the cell scene in Night Visitor, and I just wanted to bring up that the guy happened to make his own little sculptures, and most interesting, there is a minotaur right over here and some other oddities. And there's some more sculptures over there in the story. Now this is the chess set that's been used in the movie Night Visitor, and I kind of feel that from the information I got from Stanley Kubrick that he's a chess he's addicted to chess basically. According to one story, he basically during the while filming the scene over here, they basically stopped production for 3 days or stopped filming for 3 days so he could play a chess game. And I feel that these pieces are very, very interesting looking, and that this might have been the attraction that Stanley Kubrick had with this movie, is that he just enjoyed looking at the chess pieces, and that's probably why he might have remembered this movie. And then towards the ending of the Night Visitor, there's an axe, and that's Max van Sydow, and he's basically using the axe. The axe that we see like Jack Nicholson has too. Now, going back to the phone call conversation, the information that I've got besides Stanley Kubrick asking Stephen King about life after death, the other information that came off that I was able to find out is like he was throwing out ideas to Stephen King, like what happened if Halloran is the killer, or what happened if everybody dies, and stuff like that. And I feel that deep down that if Stanley Kubrick saw this movie and knew that Stephen King saw this movie, he might have asked him like, why don't we do the movie like in an asylum instead of a haunted hotel? And I feel like this might have not worked very well with Stephen King, and he might have felt really insulted somehow for that. But I do feel that an asylum was the direction that Stanley Kubrick was going by, but I'll tell you more about that later. The ending scene, most arguably, Stephen King comes up and says like, well, in the ending of my book, the hotel explodes, and in The Shining, just that Jack just freezes to death. And I feel like this was also kind of inspired from Night Visitor, the nastiness of the code, and which is really weird because in the movie you just see there's Danny right there, and you can see that he's cold and miserable, and there's Jack Nicholson. He's all holding his shirt. He's very cold, and naturally towards the end of the movie he just freezes to death because he got lost in a maze. Well, in the movie Night Visitor, which is really weird, and I just wanted to just show a couple clips because I just feel like if you really want to see the movie, I don't want to spoil out the movie at all. I think the movie is very interesting to watch. It does have several huge plot holes in the movie itself, but because of the actors in the movie are really good in what they're doing. It's they could probably sell you a lemon with no tires, and that's how good they are. And this is a great movie to watch. And in this case, you just see all the snow here. Max Snyder's running, and yes, he's running in his underwear with boots on. And there is, and then you could just look at his face, how miserable, how cold it is. Just how that is. So, and I'm just wondering because he's so miserable and so cold that is this guy gonna freeze to death or what? Anyway, this is Richard Stashy from Tanker to Tales. Thank you for watching my video, The Shining Inspirations Part 2. And please post your comments on. Please post your comments. I'll be happy to read them all. And hopefully it won't be long for the next one. Thank you.